connecting the blocks and unchaining the blockchain. For today's edition of Tech Talk, we're coming at you from Swiss Next Day 2018, where that ever-growing technology of blockchain is front and center of today's discussions. Now, to help set the stage, we spoke first to the head of Swiss Next Network. He's Ambassador Mauro Moruzzi. Mauro, thank you so much for being with us today here on Tech Talk at Swiss Next Day 2018. Quite a turnout.
Anna Maria, that's my pleasure to host you here, and I think it will be a great day. You see a lot of people around. We are absolutely delighted by the interest that has been raised by the topic, I think, and this will be an excellent opportunity for us to showcase a little bit what Swiss Next is doing around the world.
How do you measure the success of these kinds of events? I mean, because at the end of the day, you do have to answer to the taxpayers. Swiss Next is a government-backed institution, right?
No, absolutely. So the Swiss Next Day is more or less the only event that we have in Switzerland under the brand Swiss Next so far. Probably in the future we will try to have a little bit more with events that have an international outreach. The success is measured actually by the commitment that our partners are putting also into the efforts that we bring to help them to have more collaboration worldwide and to stay relevant. I think that this part, blockchain today, but like migrations issues, digitalization, aging societies, some of the topics that we dealt with in the last years are really very important topics, and we have to stay as Swiss actors at the forefront if we want to survive in a very fierce competition worldwide. So the success is measured by the interest that we have and by the commitment that our partners are putting into the collaborative projects that can be raised through this kind of events.
Earlier you mentioned blockchain, which is of course the theme of this year. How much of this is just hype?
I think that in Switzerland, you cannot say that blockchain is just hype, because you have quite a lot of very relevant institutions, finance institutions, but also other ones that know that there is quite a lot of challenges that are coming ahead. Switzerland has its strengths there, and I think that the best proof of that we receive lots of delegations from not only from Europe but worldwide that are coming into Switzerland to see how the Swiss are dealing with the topic. So I don't think that we would have such a large audience. We had to refuse dozens of people who wanted to attend this event today if that was just a hype. It's much more than that.
And Switzerland, of course, has already been developing itself as a crypto valley nation, something that both the government stands behind. Schneider Ammann, that was one of his last efforts this past year, so definitely receiving a lot of support. But places like the SNB, the Swiss National Bank, is not quite sold yet. What do you think has to happen?
I think everybody is in its role. The Swiss National Bank has a mandate, and they are doing what they have to do, and they are completely autonomous from the government. And that's pretty much the right way to do things. But they will have also to confront with the reality that we are facing in the world. The world is changing, and it's changing at a very speedy pace. And we cannot just be there and wait for the things to happen. We have to make to help our people make the things change. You said Crypto Valley, you said the government, Mr. Schneider Ammann is one, but there are several federal councillors who are very interested in the topic. I would just mention also Uli Maurer. When he goes abroad worldwide, he is very interested also in this kind of topic, and I'm sure the other ones have a close eye on what is going on in this matter.
Obviously, Swiss Next stands for innovation, and for putting out that Swiss innovation that has given Switzerland its place on the world map. Nowadays, it feels like that a lot of the development is happening elsewhere, though, and Switzerland is hosting a lot of these companies. How long do you think before these two things match up to where development is also happening here at the same rate?
That's a good question, and actually it's not something that we discovered today or yesterday. We know since years that our own companies are investing much more in research and development abroad than they do in Switzerland, but they still increased over the years their spending in Switzerland too. So that's the way we want to stay relevant. The creation also of the Innovation Park, a decision that has been taken by the Parliament not so long ago, was also a signature, because basically we have already innovation parks more than 10 or 20 years in some of the locations in Switzerland, but to give a common brand gives more visibility to what we're doing. And of course, we want to stay attractive for the companies abroad because they know that we have here the manpower, we have here the brains, we have here the environment that is required in terms of political and legal stability, protection of intellectual property, security, all these kind of issues that are really relevant. The infrastructure in Switzerland is also world-class, and I'm not so worried that we should lose our momentum. Of course, we are facing a much fiercer competition than in the years that we spent already, but the reality is that the best way to react to this new reality is to be at the forefront, not to be afraid of change, but to try to be part of this change.
And what about you? Did you invest in any cryptocurrency, or are you a blockchain man?
Actually, I have to confess that I'm still really very naive in this field, and that's why I'm looking forward to hear and know more about all this stuff just after it. And I'm not a millionaire either, so even if I would invest a little bit, probably this would not make my day. But
all right, wonderful, Mauro. Thank you so much for your insights and for your time.
welcome also for being our partner here today, Anna Maria.
Our next guest did in fact admit that she owns a little bit of Bitcoin and it's stored somewhere in some moving boxes in Washington, D.C. Catherine Foster, thank you so much for joining us. But in fact, your work as Chief Strategy Officer for Block is a very different approach to blockchain.
Absolutely, to cryptocurrencies and ICOs, actually. What we're doing is using the underlying technology of blockchain to address very specific sectoral issues and inefficiencies. So we're building with industry, defining the problems with them, and then using blockchain in things like supply chain, reporting, emissions, and sustainable development.
And what's interesting is, as you were speaking during the conference, you actually had some news happen, but not only that, but a real application of your technology, which would help for us to understand. So.
Yes, actually last week we finalized the first phase of one of our demonstrator projects, which actually is a very concrete small build around fuel traceability in the shipping industry. With a regulation coming up, putting a cap on sulfur emissions, there was little capacity in that industry to track and trace their emissions or to purchase fuels and be able to report on that to prove compliance. So that was our first build, and we launched the second phase, bringing in new partners. And then this week, today, during my speech, we launched our second demonstrator, which again is a very small, focused build with industry collaborators. And this one will be on crew certification surrounding safety and risk issues.
And this was something that did not exist before.
Not in this industry per se. And the good news is, because of our relationships with Lloyd's Register Foundation and our other consortia partners, we were able to sign on some pretty big partners this time, like Maersk Shipping.
Interesting, and congratulations for that. I mean, that sounds like a real battle won. Now, your background is in climate. Part of your background, I know you have a very, very eclectic and very diverse background, but you do have with climate. So again, one of the questions that always comes up in these blockchain conferences and discussions is this question of energy and energy consumption. How do you reconcile the two?
Well, I think there's a few responses there. The first is that energy issue is around the type of proof that's being used, particularly in the Bitcoin space. And not all of the proofs actually require that much energy. So we're using different types of proofs, but we're using different platforms. We're very tech agnostic. We fit the platform towards what we actually need to build in terms of permissions and privacy. And the energy issue is actually being addressed in other ways as well. I think we've reached a certain peak around that discussion. And what we've seen is crypto mining become very big, but at the same time, a lot of it's using renewable energies, and we're seeing more efficiency there. But what we're seeing also is these other proofs sort of emerging that will allow us to actually build in more energy efficient ways and link it to energy and resources that are renewable.
And trust is something that took a hit this year, especially within blockchain and cryptocurrencies communities. How are you overcoming that?
I think we've actually overcome it all along because we actually made the decision very early on not to undertake an ICO, an initial coin offering. We were self-funded, operating on sovereign funds, grants, bootstrapping, and then we actually built up our business in that way. And by doing that, we actually built in the trust with our network, with our partnerships, with universities, with cities, with industry stakeholders, and with the developers that we use. So in that sense, I think this has been a really advantageous approach for our own business.
Last question. One of the things that came up in your presentation as well, I don't know if this was like an offhand thing, but the fact that there are 3 women that head up your company, and you're laughing, but you know, I don't often interview a lot of women in tech, and certainly not at this intersection of technology and finance.
And in fact, in the maritime space as well, which is one of the sectors we're working in, we're being called the women making waves. And
I love that.
This just happened naturally because Deanna and I the CEO and I got to know each other through my previous job at Climate Kick, and then Katya, our COO, actually has great experience in the maritime space. So it's more about the diversity, and we have really good men on our team as well from good backgrounds. So we actually have a very robust team.
Wonderful. Well, good luck with your announcement, and thank you so much for your insights today, Catherine. It was a pleasure.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
So one of the main goals, of course, of events like these, SwissNext 2018, is to network and to meet people in your industry, and more importantly, of course, to get your questions answered. So I have to ask you, Joanna, as a participant of SwissNext today, were your questions answered?
I was really impressed with FINMA presentation specifically.
Why?
Because it gave a lot of trust and kind of belief that what we are doing already and what has been done already is going into the right direction. So I'm very positive that, you know, there's a huge support system where we are based here in Switzerland for the future, for the development of the whole blockchain space. So this gives a huge additional, you know, back on the shoulder that we are moving into the right direction.
Now, Marguerite, you are also, or specifically more involved in the funding of blockchain-related companies' activities. So the FINMA news must have also been good for you.
Yes, and it's really great to see how here in Switzerland regulators and the industry works together. Now we have what they call the crypto winter. It's not only cold outside, but you know, since the currency prices went down, everyone thinks it's broken and it's done. Actually, it's not. The good projects stand out, and they are now standing. And we at Crypto Valley Venture Capital, you know, you're also doing our first batch of incubation programs. And we look around and see, wow, that good projects are gonna last on, and you know, we can work with them now. It's crypto winter, time to buckle down and get really going.
And speaking of good projects, this is how you came to know Joanna.
Yeah. That's how we met.
How did that come about?
So we were doing a blockchain competition for finance, and we had over 150 applicants from all over the world. And Joanna scored second place with her startup Orion Vault. And now, you know, they won office space at the Crypto Valley Labs in Zug, and also coaching from CVVC. And that's how we got to know each other and can continue to work together now.
All right, so let's get down to it. What is it you do?
So I run a startup that's called Orion Vault, and we are a platform for digital art investment and donations. In a nutshell, you can basically purchase art pieces over our platform, build a portfolio, and eventually also sell it to other collectors.
I mean, and how is that going? I mean, do you find that people are interested and are trusting this technology with their art?
Sure. We were really, really surprised how the artists picked up the solution, the proposal that we offered to the market. So we are really surprised with the response that we get from the artists specifically. And we are hoping that we're going to have also very good response from collectors who are eager to experiment with this new kind of investment opportunity and also collecting art in a very different, secure way.
And this bit of a downturn that we've seen with blockchain and cryptocurrencies this year, does this rattle you at all?
Sure. I think, as Margaret also mentioned, we have a crypto winter right now, and I think it sparkles in most of the founders' creativity even to a higher levels. So when you have tough times, you also have to be extra creative in terms of building the business, finding cooperation opportunities, and I think, you know, a lot of projects need to stretch their creative minds, and it also pushes us to a different level. So in the end, I think we're gonna see the spring coming in. We don't know when it's gonna come, but still there are opportunities for blockchain startups and projects to thrive and to move forward in this winter time.
What does this winter time really mean for you at the end of the day, Margaret? Because you are the one who is helping get companies like Joanna's funded. You're the one who has to stand in front of other investors and convince them.
Yes, so I would say it's now better than ever. We have seen a first hype wave, and we have seen a first hype wave, but I would say it's now better than ever because the good projects, as I said, they will prevail, and the technology as such, you know, is still great. Just because there's a hiccup, you know, in currency worth, it doesn't mean anything for the tech that's being built. And what we see now, people are really building the product first, they develop the technology, and then they go for the fundraising, which is a much better approach than in the past, where we had a white paper first, an idea, trying to get as much funding as possible in with the ICO, and then say, okay, we're going to build it later, but eventually it might not have been built. So I think it's better than ever now. People build the tech, yeah.
All right, well, thank you, ladies, so much for sharing your insights with us today on Tech Talk. Thank you, all of you, for joining us here at Swiss Next Day 2018.